Thank you for tuning into the Island Treasures podcast. We value the insights shared by our guests and hosts, but it's important to note that their personal experiences are intended to inform and encourage, and not to replace professional, legal, or medical advice. With that, we are ready for today's exciting episode. Hello and welcome to Island Treasures podcast. For years, we've walked alongside caregivers in the midst of their caregiving journey, offering resources, support, encouragement, and community. Now, as we shift our focus, we'll be exploring what comes after caregiving. I'm your host, Allison Van Schie, inviting you into conversations with former caregivers. Each episode features honest reflections on what comes next. Stories of resilience, renewal, and rediscovery. I'm glad you're here. Let's explore new treasures together. So welcome, Jeanette. I am thrilled to have you joining me on the Island Treasures podcast today.
I am so happy to be here. I wish I had a pretty background like you do. I love your little background, the nice water and everything. But thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. It's going to be a fun time. I promise.
It is definitely going to be a fun time. And I promise too. So listeners, stay tuned.
Yes.
So Jeanette, let's start with your caregiving story. Just a brief summary of your caregiving journey, if you don't mind.
Okay. I'm going to try to make my 40-year-long caregiving journey a brief summary. Here we go. Let's see if we can do it. So in 1984, my mom was diagnosed with a disease called myasthenia gravis. At the time, it was a very unknown, strange, nobody had ever heard of it kind of thing. All I knew was my mom got sick. She went into the hospital. I went and stayed with some relatives for several months. And then when mom came home, she had had a surgery. She was on a ton of medication. And what I understood at the time about her illness was that she was very weak, very tired. It was very important that she not be stressed out or made upset in any way. And I could be a really good girl and help her if I wanted to. So that started, like I said, I was 9 years old. And over the next 40 years of her life, that manifested itself in many, many different ways. It started out with me counting medications for her. I remember about 4 years ago, sitting in her room with her in her ADA compliant condo and still counting her medicines for her. Very similarly to the way I did when I was 9. So some things stayed the same and many, many things changed depending on how her illness was doing, what my capacity was, my age, my ability to understand things I was able to do. My role changed, her needs changed. And then about 3 years ago, she went into a nursing home after having basically the last 5 years, she was not in a nursing home. She was in the hospital 35 times in 5 years. So she finally had to go to a nursing home, and that's where she stayed until she passed away last year. So we're coming up on a year here very soon, but she passed away. And so, like I said, in the caregiving experience, I have experienced, had to deal with most things over the 40 years. But that's the briefest I could be. That was about 3 minutes.
Oh, well done. Really sorry. It's like you say, it's coming up on an anniversary since her first anniversary since her passing.
Yes.
And when we first spoke, Jeanette, I didn't realize it had been that recent. And
yes.
So I am truly sorry for your loss. And
well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Being a 9-year-old and having this placed on you, to be quiet to be attentive to your mom? Like, who wants to do
Right.
that when they're 9 years old, you know?
Well, and I tell people now, like I wrote my book and it's like, and on my website, it's like, I've been a caregiver since I was 9 years old. But obviously, when you're 9, you don't know. Nobody's calling you a caregiver.
But you have
You're
to be
not.
quiet.
Yeah. But there is this concept there was this idea of, you be a good girl and then that'll help your mom.
Yeah.
So every child is told to be good, right? But being bad means you're going to get in trouble most of the time. Being bad in my case, uh, I believed, I don't know that anybody said you could kill your mother, but I believed that it was somehow going to contribute to her going back into the hospital, getting sick, or even dying. And so, um, I tried really hard to be good. She was tired all the time, but also she was so tired that like if I was watching TV, it wasn't going to wake her up. So like I didn't have to be too overly quiet, but there was this presence in our house other than my mom, my stepdad, and I, and it was the disease for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So in the year since she's passed, how have you been? Could you walk us through some of the emotions that you've experienced?
Yes, I would love to do that because, well, I think it's important to share these things. But in addition to that, I really had quite a while to think about what it was going to be like after she was gone. And so your listeners and we've all heard and talked about this idea of anticipatory grief. We know it's going to come to an end, and sometimes we grieve what we've lost already before we've lost them. We grieve what we won't have because we're going to lose them, all of those kind of things, right? And so I was already doing that. And then when she went on hospice, which is about 8 months before she passed away, I began really starting to think like, after all of this time thinking this was really never going to be over, like I just knew so many people that had like stepped into the caregiving arena like with me, like their loved one had it and they would step in and then they were done within, sometimes a year, sometimes 5 years. And there I was just still plugging along. Their mom we were still plugging along. And so like part of me was just like, yeah, like I just couldn't wrap my head around it that she was going to be gone. Because I had been told many times that, and she was told, she always would say, like, I was told I wouldn't live to see you graduate from, high school or college or get married or have kids. And, she was able to do all of those things. So we just didn't really get it. We understood it intellectually and somewhat emotionally, but just we really couldn't wrap our heads around it. So that last 8 months was very interesting for both of us. There were periods of time during that 8 months where I was really like, why is it taking so long? Like, she's so ready. I'm ready. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying that today for anybody who may be feeling that same way and feeling guilty about it.
Yeah.
I want to say that out loud to let you know that I was sitting there thinking, how much longer is this going to take? Because we are both so ready to be done. Even though I knew when she was done, she wasn't going to be worried about me anymore or sad about me. And I was going to be sad about her. But anyway, even when she passed away, that whole experience, and I can go into that more if you want me to later, but I really don't feel like I have truly settled into the sad part until maybe the last month. Maybe that had something to do with my birthday and then Mother's Day and all of that. But I also think, I had some health issues like almost immediately after my mom's funeral. I had some debilitating pain that I had to get addressed. And so I was managing my grief, but it was almost like a denial. I felt like I was in a fog, if you will, almost like the world was moving around me and I was standing still. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen like those kind of, those shots in a movie where like the person's standing still and everything is like flying by them. That's kind of what I felt like for months, which is just like, I am separate from everything else that's going on around me because I felt like my whole world had changed and no one else's had. And so I couldn't really relate to anyone or anything that hadn't also recently had a very similar loss.
That's a very interesting observation that your world had changed and
Hmm.
nobody else's had.
Yeah.
And it had. That is what
Yeah.
happened. That was your
Right.
reality. Yeah.
Well, and like so many people had said, because my caregiving journey was so long, there would be so many people that are like, what are you going to do after your mom dies? Like, you're going to have all this time. And it turned out that like I needed all of that space to, heal myself physically. Cause like I said, I had that pain issue that I had to deal with, but a physical pain issue, I should say. But then like I was a zombie for like a month. And then after that, I kind of went through the motions of trying to crawl myself out of that fog. But I still think I was not all together there. And I would have some good days and bad days. Like I would feel like, okay, I'm really starting to get the hang of things. And the next day I couldn't get out of bed. I would be so exhausted. And I, had some tears, some days where I was sadder than others. But I told you before we hit record, I just finished my therapy appointment today. And I was saying to her, like, I feel like I'm just now getting out of the denial phase. And it's been
So,
almost a year.
yeah, I'm really grateful you said that because I was just dying to ask you, how did you manage all of those feelings, And
Yeah.
so you are using a therapist or you are
Yes.
engaging the services of a therapist.
Yes, I am, have been in therapy off and on for several different times in my life, but most specifically about like maybe 6 years ago. Things were getting pretty rough with mom already with her health, and I just wasn't. I write about this in my book, so like the burnout was very strong. I was starting to, you know, glitch, if you will. Probably a good way to say it is shorthand. Things were just not good. And so I got into therapy then, and I really think that's helped me a lot with getting through the last, 6 years, but definitely the last year, because I know that I don't expect myself to be perfect, or to follow some sort of made up trajectory of the way maybe society thinks grief should work. Um, I'm also fully present in my grief. I don't want to get rid of it or hide from it. Um, there have been times I've said, I just want to wrap myself up in it, and not in a Debbie Downer kind of way, but I want to experience those emotions that help me remember my mom and sometimes be sad, remember my mom and sometimes be laugh or be happy, or think about how much she loved certain things that I encounter now. If I see a sunflower, I can't help but think of her. If I see she's from the countryside, if you will, and driving long distances in our state, we see this kind of flower that she really loved, and they only grow in the wild. I mean, I guess you could probably plant some in your backyard and they would grow, but like they're wildflowers. They always grow in bunches together. And so, seeing those makes me think of her, things like that. So I want to be fully there in all of those times, but then there are other times where I just want my mom back,
Of course.
you know.
Yeah. 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 So you've mentioned your book a couple of times. So
Yeah.
let's talk about your book. Like I'm sure that writing your book had
Yes.
some healing components in it as well.
Yes. And I apologize if I sounded a little self-promotional. That
No,
wasn't
you
my
weren't.
intention.
That's not you,
But
Jeanette.
but I felt compelled to write about what I was experiencing during my burnout, because what I realized, and of course now, obviously I was probably burnt out for 10 years before I recognized I was burned out, right? Um,
Hmm.
but one of the biggest problems I had with um, dealing with my burnout is that sense of, you have to be a good girl, you have to help your mom, a lot of us, especially women who grew up as little girls, we were told to be a good girl. We were told to perform well. Things were based on, our worth was oftentimes tied to some sort of achievement, some sort of accomplishment. And so I had that just like we all do. And then I had the extra weight of, and by the way, if you're not good, if you don't achieve, in my head, it's that could hurt your mom in some way. And then of course, as her caregiver, that just heightened even more, right? So if you don't do this right, it could hurt your mom. It could hurt your mom. It could hurt your mom. And so um, I had this understanding that it was my duty, it was my role to just give, do as much as possible for my mom, for my children, for my husband, for my church, for my community, whatever. And then on top of that, I was trying to take care of myself because that's what you're supposed to do, is to take care of yourself so that you can take care of everyone else.
Which is, what we say, oh, be sure to look after yourself. Yeah.
Yes. And all the caregivers roll their eyes and scream internally. Yeah. So at the time, I was at the height of my burnout. I was teaching Pilates, or at least I had been an instructor. I don't know if by the time I hit burnout, I was still teaching, but I was running 5 times a week. I was doing yoga. I was going to the gym. I had led prayer groups. I had done gratitude journals. I had taken, I was doing all the things. I was eating all the right fruits and vegetables and having all the water and
so you've had all the self-care activities.
Yeah. Yeah. So if somebody said this was self-care, I was doing it. Candles, you betcha. Essential oils, I got it. Like lavender spritz on my pillow. I was doing all the things, at various times, obviously over the decades, but I was doing all the things and I just could not stop feeling exhausted, stop feeling worthless, stop feeling like I was doing a horrible job. And I was like, well, then this is a lie that self-care is the answer, or at least what they're calling self-care. So intuitively, I knew that taking care of myself was important. And so what I started to get curious about was, why do I think these are the things I need to be doing? Is it because an algorithm or a magazine article or a fitness, and like somebody at the gym is telling me this? Or is this what my body is telling me? Is this what my heart is telling me, the core of my being, my soul, my spirit? And of course, I didn't know because I was so checked out. I couldn't tell what I needed, right? And so part of that for me was therapy, but also really just getting curious about asking myself, what do you need right now? And it turned out I didn't need to add another exercise routine or another activity to my schedule in the name of self-care. What I needed was a softer, gentler tending to. So not this frantic, one more thing to add to my list that of course I wasn't going to do, which made me again feel crappy.
Yeah.
Right.
Overwhelmed and
like, oh, great. Another thing I can't do. Great. Another thing I can't be consistent at. And so it turned out, sleep was something I needed more of. But then also sleep wasn't going to heal that part of me that kept telling me I wasn't doing a good enough job as a caregiver. Like that was something that I had to work through that took a lot longer. But, and so the book From Guilt to Good Enough is, is that story of finding myself in burnout and then learning that what was going on with me in that moment and, 5 or 6 years ago, and what had happened to me as a child with my mom getting sick and then other incidents was all contributing to the burnout I was experiencing. And so it's a combination of my story, but it's also this is how I climbed out of the pit of despair and the pit of despair.
Ah.
Um, and learned to engage in caregiving in a more thoughtful, purposeful way that also had boundaries. Um, and then, I finished the book and it was published before my mom passed away.
Mm.
So I get to tell, though, how even though I had been told since I was a child that nursing home was equivalent to sending her, to the grave, that I still was able, when it was clearly necessary to do so,
Mm-hmm.
have the conversation, and it wasn't just one, but, have those hard conversations with her. And she did go into a nursing home and stay there for 2 years. And I was able to say in that story that I told about that experience, that I was able to do that without the feeling of guilt and shame, even though it wasn't what she wanted,
Oh.
you know, and she was able to agree to it, even though it wasn't what she wanted. And all of the stuff I had feared, which was that she would disown me or like that she wouldn't love me anymore, all that fell away. Like all of that fear fell away. And I was able to, I feel like, be a better daughter. Now, of course, she would have said I was always, you know, a good daughter. I
The
mean,
best daughter.
to be clear, just to clear this up for any, in case I don't want to misrepresent, there were plenty of times my mom told me other things that were not that. She wasn't all sunshine and roses and you're the perfect daughter all the time.
Yeah.
Especially that last year, we were really able to say all the things that we needed to say, right?
That's really important for folks to hear,
Yeah.
that having your mom go into the nursing home, even though it was something neither one of you wanted, was necessary for probably both of you.
Yes. Yes. And so, like, I'm not, I say this about a lot of things, but I'm not like pro nursing home or anti nursing home. I'm pro the families making the best decision they can for everyone. So, like, a lot of times we make the best decision for our loved one,
Mhm.
but at the expense, and I'm not talking about like, we all, like, there is sacrifice in caregiving. That's, part of it. I'm not talking about that kind of like, what's good for you. But there are people, including me, that were making decisions, like I was making decisions about care for my mom, not on what was needed, but what either she wanted, which is sometimes, like that has to be considered, obviously. But I was also letting fear and guilt drive my choice. Now, to say that there was no fear, there was no guilt would be not true. But I don't have to believe the guilty feeling that I have. I don't have to let that lead my decision making, and so that's the difference that it made for me is, you know, I was able to separate the fear I had or the guilt I had. And sometimes it was the fear I had, not because I thought the decision was wrong, but because I thought someone else might think it was wrong. And so I was afraid of disappointing them.
Hmm.
And so when I stopped worrying about all that and just said, what does my mom need? What does she want? And this may be a detour, but I think it's important. Okay. My mom always said, no nursing home. It'll put me in the grave. She said other, even scarier things. She really wanted to drive the point home. Don't put her in a nursing home. Because she thought it would kill her, essentially. So in her mind, nursing home equals dead. Okay. So my whole life, it's keep her out of the nursing home, keep her out of the nursing home. Well, then I won't go into it here, but let me just say it became increasingly obvious that that was what was necessary not to keep her happy, but to do what she actually wanted, which was to stay alive.
Mm.
So, yes, she did not want to go in a nursing home, but that's because she wanted to stay alive.
Right.
And so when I started having those conversations with her, it was like, listen, I know you want to live longer, but where we are now, your chance of living is going to increase if you go into the nursing home versus decrease if you stay home. And in our case, it really was like she was bedridden. So like,
And she understood that she was in
yeah,
a,
and yes, that is another thing I like to say. Thank you for bringing that up, Allison. My mom was cognitively aware and able to have input. And we were able to have conversations where she understood what was happening. And actually, like I tell people, like I didn't put her in a nursing home. She signed the paperwork. She's the one that said, I understand this is what needs to happen,
mm-hmm.
you know, but it wasn't one conversation. It was different types of boundaries being set over the years leading up to that, you know, small boundaries, bigger boundaries. It was conversations about, you know, when she would say, no, it's not, when, you know, when the time comes, I'll know. And I'll say, well, how will you know? Like, you know, and we were having these conversations so that when the time came, it was more obvious to her as well, because we had talked about it. And like, I was able to say like, well, what if you can't, you know, do this, or what if you can't do that? Well, and she would always have some fancy, fancy idea.
Oh.
But, you know, eventually she'd like, well, if this happens or this happens, then anyway, yes. So I wrote the book to share my story because I didn't want other caregivers to let guilt and fear run their decisions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I also am like, I can't be the only one thinking I'm just not like, I thought I just wasn't doing self care right. And if I could just get it right, then everything else would be right. And like, that's another myth of the whole self care industrial complex or whatever.
Well, I'm really grateful you shared all of the self-care techniques that you did take part in, because you covered them all. Like, and for you to say, you know, that just wasn't touching what I was really needing.
Right.
And
And to be clear, I still run, I still do yoga, I still pray, I still do those things. But at the time, I was just grasping at straws and just throwing everything into the toolkit and not really asking, like, you can have things in your toolkit to tend to your own needs. You don't need all of them all the time. I mean, maybe some people take ibuprofen every day, but like, most of us don't. You know, we take it when we need it. And so learning to listen to what you really need and understand what your body needs. Sometimes that means talking to a doctor, like a medical doctor. Sometimes that means talking to a therapist, a family member, a friend, or all of the above. Learning to be able to listen to yourself and understand what your body is telling you. That's a skill that is necessary for self-care. I think that's where we need to start versus, oh, I think I just need to wear a weighted vest when I like, you know, or whatever. I mean, I love a weighted vest if you want one, but I'm just saying I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I did
yeah,
not need another weighted vest. So,
yeah.
you know, I like to put it this way. Any of those self-care things can work. None of them will work if they're not what you need and if you feel guilty about doing them. So,
Great
you know,
summary. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the book is available. How do folks
Yes.
access it?
So you can go to my website, JeanetteYates.com, and there's a little section for the book there. And then if you're one of those people that always has an Amazon tab open on your
Yep.
on your laptop, then I'm there as well. So you can get it there. And if for some reason you're like, I don't do Amazon, then go to my website and fill out a contact form and let me know, and I'll make sure you get one.
Perfect.
I got you.
So you also do bridging to caregivers to technology. So can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about that, please, Jeanette?
Yeah. So when I started my business, my caregiving business, it was really doing like an extension of the book, right? Just to connect with caregivers, talk them through some of the things I learned about self-care and tending to their own needs, and almost like life coaching, but for caregivers specifically. So like, I'm not going to give you things that like I know caregivers don't have time or energy to do, right? You know, we work through. And so that was fine. But what I found was, it was still really hard to connect with caregivers one on one, which is what I really like to do. And so obviously last year was the first 3 quarters of the year was very heavy with caregiving. So I basically was just muddling through and just posting stuff and trying to sell my book or whatever. And then I went kind of dark for a little bit after mom passed away just to give myself a little breathing room. I wrote about my grief journey. I do have a more personal blog on Substack where I talk about my caregiving experience versus the blog that's on the website, which is more technology based. But at the end of the year last year, I started trying to think about like, how can I best serve caregivers? And I do have a background in technology and marketing and community building on a large scale using technology. So, like online communities, essentially. And so, with that tech background, I also have a teaching background. I was a teacher for a while. I thought with all of the technology that's coming out in the what they call the age tech space, so monitoring devices, safety devices, communication devices, organization tools for caregivers and the aging population, I felt like some education, some general knowledge, like 101 general ed type stuff about technology would be helpful to caregivers because there's a lot of different technologies out there and AI is being used in every single one of them, but not all AI is made the same. And so again, going back to that fear, right? I didn't want someone to be too afraid to use technology because of some of the things they might hear. So I wanted to educate people on how to, the realities of technology out there. And then I also didn't want people to use technology with no consideration for how to set up the settings and privacy and paying attention to privacy. So I kind of wanted to bridge that gap of we're all aware of technology, but understanding how it works, there's a gap between that. And I wanted to kind of bridge that gap between the awareness and the knowledge. So I do a lot of speaking for caregiver support groups. I do speak one-on-one, like sometimes families, just need a little help. So I do that as well. But, I do a lot of speaking and writing for just general, I talk a lot about ethical care tech, ethical AI. And then another part of what I do is I work with companies I have personally vetted. There's a lot of startups out there that want to create something for caregivers or elderly people. And I want to make sure that when they're doing that, they actually know what caregivers need slash want from not only a technical perspective, but a user experience. So, for example, if you're creating an app for caregivers and it is too hard to set up, too hard to log in, too hard to use when I'm in there, I'm not going to, caregivers don't have time for that. So I talk a lot about the user experience, customer experience. So how are you going to treat me as a customer? Like we need a little bit, like I think all customers should be treated, with respect and dignity and, well tended to. But I do think caregivers, some might consider them a vulnerable population where we're exhausted, all of these things. And then, of course, if you're marketing something to someone with dementia, how is your technology protecting that person? Not just, we're keeping an eye in case they fall. Well, how are you protecting the data that you're collecting in order to do that? So I talk with companies about that and, encourage them to, don't do the bare minimum. There are no regulations right now. So we have to, as a community, as a caregiver community, we have to decide what we're going to accept and what we're not. And so I encourage caregivers to speak up for themselves and their loved ones. And I encourage tech companies to do the ethical thing, every chance they get.
Ethics are so important. We had an ethics committee when I was working as a social worker, and we would frequently meet to just discuss what ethics need to be visited and is something that's happening breaching that. It's
Right.
so important to have ethics. So I was
Yes.
really grateful to hear that there's such a thing as ethical AI. I did not know that. So that's cool. But yeah,
Well, it's interesting because depending on, so like I was talking to my son about this the other day. He's in college and he's doing a lot of work on he's in political science, but also in literature and studying theory and things like this. And so they talk a lot about AI in his classes too. And we were talking about like, I want to believe there's a way to use the technology of AI in an ethical way.
mhm,
Um, and so that's what I'm pushing for and hoping for. There are questions about, as it continues to grow, how we can stay safe and hold the companies accountable, especially when there's no overarching regulations going on,
mhm,
right?
yeah,
So it's interesting, but I was telling my son like I believe in humanity,
mhm,
so I believe that we and then from a marketing perspective, I believe we as the people being marketed to can demand ethical um, practices
yeah.
in our tools. So that's what I'm hoping for. And I want, you know, I'm throwing those starfish back in the ocean, I guess, but like I'm trying.
Yeah, I love that. That's one of my favorite analogies is saving the starfish, one starfish at a
Yeah.
time. So power to that analogy. I love
Yes.
that. So this is great information, Jeanette, and your story is powerful. And
Thank you.
hearing, the fear and the guilt and the self-care that you have to find what works for you and
Yeah.
what it is you need. And
Right.
all those voices that you're sussing out that are coming
Yeah.
at you. Yeah, listen to the one that comes from inside your heart.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah. So, do you have a quote that you'd like to share?
Oh my goodness. Um, I will say one thing that I say to caregivers all the time, and I said this to myself and I say it to caregivers, is that you have done enough, you are doing enough, and you are enough.
Yeah.
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 Now, as a literature major, former English teacher, there's my brain just immediately spritzed.
Yeah.
It just went on the fritz when you said that. I'm thinking about a Gatsby quote. I'm thinking about a Robert Frost quote. I'm thinking about Wendell
No,
Berry. Uh,
no,
you know,
no. And it could even be a quote from your book, like something
yeah.
that you've said in your book. But that is very good, though, like that,
Yeah, I
what
think,
you shared.
well, at the end of the day, like if somebody walks away with that in their head, like I think that's good enough, as we say.
That's a message they need to hear. Yeah.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah. So you've given your website, but you want to just say it one more time?
Yes, my website is JeanetteYates.com, JeanetteYates. And you can find my book, you can find my podcast, which I also have. So it's From Guilt to Good, and then From Guilt to Good Enough is the book. And then things that I've written about AI, some care tech information that's useful for caregivers is there, some like checklists and 101 type things that we want you to know. And so that's all on the website.
That is a great resource. I am definitely going to check out some things that I learned today from you. I'm going to go to find out the 101 stuff because,
Yeah.
hey, that should be something I can understand.
Yes. Yes. I try to talk about technology in a way that is not techie.
Awesome. No,
Yeah.
this has been great. Do you have anything you'd like to add before we conclude?
No, I just want to thank you so much for having me on. It's been a wonderful blessing to talk to you and get to share my story. And like I said, for all of you who are listening, please go to my website, reach out to me. I'm a real human and I do answer all my emails personally. So,
Thank you, Jeanette. I think you're lovely. And I reached out to you and
yes.
I don't remember how we met, but yeah, it's been great connecting with you
Yeah.
these few times. So thank you so much
Teresa.
today.
It was
Oh,
Teresa.
Teresa Wilbanks. Let's just
Yeah.
drop that name, shall we?
Yes. Yeah. She's great. She's great.
Definitely great. Another great resource for caregiving.
Yes, for
So
sure.
anyway, thanks for today and All the best.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Jeanette reminded us how essential it is to understand what self-care truly means. Not the performative version we're sold, but the kind that begins with listening inward and responding to what we genuinely need. She named how guilt and decision fatigue can shape our choices, and how boundaries help us care in ways that are sustainable and honest. And she highlighted the importance of becoming comfortable with the technology that supports us as caregivers and as we age, so we can use it with confidence rather than fear. And Jeanette leaves us with a message she offers to caregivers everywhere, a message worth carrying into life after caregiving. You've done enough. You are doing enough. And you are enough. Thank you for tuning in today. And to Jeanette Yates, thank you for sharing your caregiving story and what you're doing now in your life after caregiving. If you enjoyed today's episode, share it with your friends, especially those navigating life after caregiving or navigating through caregiving. To check out Jeanette's great resources, her book, From Guilt to Good Enough, her podcast, From Guilt to Good, or many of her other resources, including the Caregiver Tech Field Guide, her website is JeanetteYates.com. And if you don't want to miss future episodes of the Island Treasures podcast, be sure to subscribe. See you next episode.